Hey everyone. Tonight, we're drifting back to a time when the most secure job in town involved chopping off heads. So, dim the lights, find a comfortable spot, and let's sink slowly into the strange, lonely world of medieval executioners. Because for a small group of men, and occasionally women, history handed them the world's most unpleasant profession, and then expected them to quietly go home afterward, as if nothing happened. Imagine a man standing in a public square, holding an axe polished bright for the occasion. His job is to end another human life. He's probably wearing his one nice tunic, the one that doesn't have visible blood on it. Around him, the crowd jeers, or cheers, or simply stares, because people in the 14th century had no concept of appropriate entertainment. And when it's all over, he collects his fee, wipes down his blade, and walks home. To a wife, some children, and perhaps a mildly judgmental cat. That's the story we're following tonight. What happened after the axe was cleaned, the body carted away, and the crowd dispersed? What kind of person could do this job? What did they eat for dinner? Did they have friends? Or did they just quietly sit alone in their cottage, polishing the same blade, and wondering whether tomorrow's head would be easier or harder to remove? Let's drift back to the late Middle Ages, to small walled towns and cramped, smoky homes, and meet the people whose entire profession was both essential and despised. The unhappiest profession in Europe. In most of medieval Europe, executioners were not chosen out of ambition. No one ever said, "When I grow up, I want to behead people for a living." It was a job that tended to happen to you, in the same way that the plague happened to you. Sometimes, the town needed a new hangman, and they found one the easiest way possible, by forcing a criminal to do it. If a man was sentenced to death for theft, he might be offered a deal. Do you want to be hanged, or would you like to hang people for us instead? It was a truly uplifting career move. And so, many executioners were themselves ex-criminals, thieves, deserters, or men with questionable pasts, which, in medieval terms, meant alive, poor, and unlucky. They took the job, not because they wanted power, but because it meant they could keep breathing. Naturally, that didn't make them popular. Even though the town needed someone to swing the axe, nobody wanted to talk to that person. They were untouchables. Feared, hated, yet indispensable. Medieval society loved a moral contradiction, after all. The man who couldn't touch bread. Executioners often lived just outside city walls, in what were politely called fringes of respectability. The people inside the walls enjoyed their moral cleanliness, while the executioner lived near the gallows, next to a field no one wanted to own. In some towns, he wasn't allowed to touch food at the market, because, apparently, if the man who kills criminals touches your cabbage, the cabbage becomes evil. In Nuremberg, for instance, the executioner could only enter shops during specific hours, and he had to knock so that people could step away from the goods before he came in. If he wanted bread, he would hold out a coin on a wooden stick, and the baker would take the coin with tongs, as if accepting payment from a demon with hygiene issues. That was his daily life. He killed people for the state, but couldn't shake hands with anyone afterward. Naturally, this made dating complicated. Marriage, love, and the problem of bad PR. If you were an executioner looking for love, your options were limited. Most respectable families would not allow their daughters anywhere near you. So, many executioners married the daughters of other executioners, or the widows of criminals, or simply women from the same social underworld. Over generations, this created entire executioner families, dynasties of professional killers, passing down the trade like a grim heirloom. In Germany, the most famous was the Franz Schmidt family of Nuremberg. Franz himself, who lived in the 1500s, was the city's official executioner for nearly 45 years. He executed 394 people, flogged about 350 more, and yet, in his spare time, became a respected healer. Yes, a healer. Because when you spend your days taking lives, apparently you want to balance the ledger by mending a few bones on the weekend. He kept a meticulous diary, describing every execution in haunting detail, but also recording how he treated wounds, set fractures, and mixed medicines. So, by day, he beheaded thieves. By night, he applied herbal ointment to villagers who wouldn't even speak to him in public. It's a strange image. But then, the entire world of the medieval executioner was built on contradictions. The doctor of death. Executioners had a surprisingly good understanding of anatomy, for obvious reasons. They knew where joints connected, how tendons stretched, how skin reacted to different blades. It wasn't medical school, but it was practical experience. This made them useful in an era when medicine was mostly a guessing game. Some cities secretly paid their executioners to perform autopsies, not for science, but to look for signs of witchcraft or sin. In the process, executioners learned how the body worked, and some quietly began treating the sick and injured. So, while everyone shunned them in daylight, at night villagers would sneak to their doors for help. A dislocated shoulder, a broken rib, a cut that wouldn't heal. They'd whisper through the door, "Please don't tell anyone I came." And the executioner, who hadn't been invited to dinner in 20 years, would patch them up, silently. It was a lonely existence, but it came with its own dark prestige. He might be shunned. But when the town needed someone dead, or someone healed, or someone discreetly buried, they always knew where to go. Free beer and other perks. Despite the social exile, executioners were not poor. The job came with excellent benefits, assuming you didn't mind the occasional flying head. They were paid by the city council, often quite handsomely, because no one else wanted the job. In some regions, they were also given tax exemptions, free lodging, and sometimes even free beer. Because nothing says, "Thank you for your service," like a lifetime supply of ale. Executioners also had the right to collect the clothes and possessions of their victims. This meant that after a hanging, they could legally strip the corpse and sell the clothes in the market, through an intermediary, of course, because God forbid anyone touch him directly. They were also given the byproducts of punishment: ropes, irons, and sometimes even the fat of executed criminals, which was, disturbingly, sold as a supposed cure for arthritis. It was known as hangman's grease. Yes, that's real. You could rub it on your sore joints and pretend it helped, though what it mostly cured was your sense of decency. The social life of the damned. So what did an executioner do for fun? After all, he wasn't invited to festivals, couldn't sit with normal citizens at church, and was legally banned from joining guilds. Many found friendship among other marginals, gravediggers, lepers, prostitutes, and butchers. They formed their own shadow society, living parallel to the respectable world. When everyone else held a feast in the main square, the executioner might be drinking with a gravedigger at the edge of town, quietly, trading gossip about who was next on the gallows list. In larger cities, executioners even held gatherings among themselves, informal networks where they could share techniques and stories. Imagine a tavern full of men comparing notes like, "Ah, yes, the Spanish sword method. Quite clean, but you have to keep the wrists loose." It was gruesome, yes, but it was also their community. They found belonging among the unwanted. Family business. In many towns, the executioner's children inherited the job. They were raised on the edge of society, taught both the mechanics of killing and the etiquette of not offending anyone respectable. They learned to handle ropes, axes, and even surgical tools before most kids learned to read. Some tried to escape the profession. They would change their names, move to another city, and pretend their father was a tailor. But the stigma followed them like a bad smell. In records from the 16th and 17th centuries, there are countless examples of young people being denied apprenticeships because someone whispered, his father was the hangman. And that was enough. Others accepted their fate and even took pride in it. By the 17th century, certain executioner families were highly professional, keeping detailed records, using standardized equipment, and insisting on clean, quick executions. A grim kind of honor code developed. If you had to kill a man, you did it efficiently and without cruelty. It was, in their view, a public service. After hours. What they did at home. When the day's work was done. When the gallows were quiet and the axe was clean, the executioner went home. His house might have been a small, sturdy cottage near the edge of town. Inside, it smelled of herbs, ale, and steel. On the table, a loaf of bread, a hunk of cheese, maybe some salted meat. He'd sit with his wife, who'd learned long ago not to ask too many questions about his day. The children would play quietly, aware that their father's touch made other people flinch. Sometimes he mended tools, sharpening blades, repairing ropes, or oiling the leather straps of the rack. Other times, he worked on his side trade, brewing medicine, treating a wound, maybe distilling something vaguely alcoholic. He might spend hours writing notes in his ledger, the names of the condemned, the crimes, the weather that day. Because, oddly enough, executioners were some of the most meticulous record keepers in pre-modern Europe. It was their way of bringing order to a job that was otherwise chaos. At night, when the candles burned low, he'd sit by the fire, quietly drinking. Not out of guilt. That was a luxury few could afford, but out of habit. It was a job that demanded numbness. And so, he practiced it daily. The Accidental Philosopher. One of the strange things about reading executioners' diaries is how calm they are. They rarely describe fear or horror, just procedure. The thief was beheaded cleanly with one stroke. The witch was burned according to the order. The murderer confessed and died bravely. And then, cloudy weather. It's the bureaucratic tone of someone doing their duty. Perhaps, after a while, the difference between life and death simply blurred. In a world where plague, famine, and war claimed lives daily, the executioner's job was not so shocking, just another form of administration. A grim necessity in a society obsessed with sin and punishment. Yet, between the lines, there's sometimes a trace of reflection, a small moment of humanity. Franz Schmidt once wrote, after executing a repentant thief, "He prayed so well that I could hardly bring myself to strike." That single sentence carries more emotion than all the rest combined. Let's drift a little further. As the candles fade, and the fire grows still, you can almost picture it. A lonely house on the outskirts of town. The faint sound of laughter from far within the city walls. And one man sitting quietly, turning a whetstone across a blade that glints in the half-dark. He's not a monster, not a hero, just a man who took a job no one else would. Tomorrow, someone will knock at his door with a message from the magistrate. Another sentence, another name. He'll nod, put down his cup, and get to work. Because that was life for the people history preferred not to talk about, the ones who carried society's conscience on their shoulders. And then weren't invited to dinner afterward. Hey everyone! Tonight, we're pouring ourselves a glass of something very old, very expensive. And very, very bad for you. Because long before energy drinks, vitamin powders, and influencer detox teas, there was another, far more glittery form of questionable health advice: drinking gold. Yes, actual gold. Melted, powdered, liquefied, and then swallowed by Europe's finest. Because, as history repeatedly proves, rich people will consume almost anything if someone in a robe says it will make them immortal. So tonight, Let's float back to the flickering candlelight of late medieval and Renaissance Europe. To a time when kings and queens were slowly poisoning themselves, one shimmering sip at a time. A toast to eternal life. Gold was seen as perfect. It didn't rust, didn't decay, didn't tarnish. It survived where everything else rotted. Which, naturally, made alchemists and royals think. Ah, yes. Let's put that inside the human body. This was the era of alchemy, the forerunner to modern chemistry, if you removed all the logic and replaced it with wishful thinking. Alchemists spent their lives trying to turn base metals into gold, and failing spectacularly. But in the process, they convinced their royal patrons that gold itself possessed divine, life-giving energy. So the idea emerged. Aurum potable, literally, drinkable gold. A miraculous potion that could cleanse the body, cure disease, sharpen the mind, and perhaps even extend life itself. And the best part, it came in liquid form, served in crystal vials or goblets, often mixed with wine or spirits. Because if you're going to drink molten metal, you might as well make it fancy. The gold rush of the 1500s. By the 1500s, this glittery nonsense had become a full-on medical trend. Across the courts of Europe, the rich began demanding gold elixirs, distilled, infused, or dissolved using vaguely scientific-sounding recipes. Physicians competed to invent new versions. Some used chemical processes involving nitric acid, others simply ground gold leaf into powder and stirred it into wine, like a very dangerous cocktail garnish. One Italian alchemist even described a process where gold was made potable by soaking it in a solution of mercury. Because, apparently, the goal was to die fabulously. The most famous of these royal wellness addicts was none other than Elizabeth I of England. Her court physician, a man named Francis Anthony, claimed to have invented a magical preparation called aurum potable. He insisted it could cure everything, from smallpox to melancholy, and restore youth. It was, essentially, a 16th-century multivitamin with sparkles. Anthony made a fortune selling it to nobles. He was arrested several times for fraud, but every time he was released, because people wanted to believe. After all, this was the Renaissance. Science, magic, and money were all drinking from the same goblet. A beautiful way to die. Now, drinking gold sounds insane. Because it was, but it also sounded poetic. Gold was the sun in solid form. To consume it felt like absorbing divine light itself. In a world obsessed with symbolism, the act of drinking gold had a strange beauty. Monarchs believed that by taking in this purest of substances, they were aligning themselves with heaven, becoming radiant from within. They didn't just want to look powerful. They wanted to glow. And, to be fair, they sometimes did. Though mostly from jaundice, mercury poisoning, or internal bleeding. When kings became experiments. Let's drift over to Prague, around the year 1600. Here, we find Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, a man so obsessed with alchemy that his palace was essentially a science fair mixed with a cult. Rudolf surrounded himself with every astrologer, philosopher, and half-mad chemist he could find. He collected strange machines, jars of preserved animals, celestial charts, and, of course, recipes for drinking gold. He was told it would cure melancholy. It did not. Rudolf spent most of his reign sinking into depression, convinced that invisible forces were plotting against him. He drank more gold, hoping to brighten his mood, and instead brightened his autopsy results. His doctors recorded that he was of weak constitution and melancholic temperament. which is early modern medical code for, he feels terrible but keeps doing it. Rudolph's obsession was so expensive that it nearly bankrupted the empire. He built laboratories, paid alchemists like Edward Kelly and John Dee to find the secret of transmutation, and filled entire rooms with failed experiments. When he died, the palace was found full of broken flasks and strange yellow residues. It looked less like a royal residence and more like a very glamorous meth lab. France's golden headache. Across the continent, the French were also gulping gold. The Valois court in the 1500s adored it. Catherine de' Medici's personal physicians prescribed tiny doses of powdered gold for vitality. Her husband, King Henry II, apparently found it invigorating, right up until he died during a jousting accident. Which was not the gold's fault, technically, though the helmet probably glowed nicely. Later, the Sun King, Louis XIV, took the obsession to new levels. He didn't just wear gold, he literally consumed it. His court physician, Antoine d'Aquin, recommended gold-based tonics to purify his royal body and maintain his divine radiance. Louis was, after all, the embodiment of the sun. And what better way to keep your metaphor alive than by swallowing your own decor? He had the world's most glittering tableware, the most gilded palace, and, for a while, possibly the most expensive urine in Europe. Spain's golden disaster. Spain, flush with gold from the Americas, embraced the trend with predictable enthusiasm. For the Spanish nobility, gold was practically a national identity. If they could conquer half the world for it, surely they could drink a little too. The Habsburgs in particular were fond of metallic medicine. The dynasty had already perfected the art of genetic self-destruction through centuries of inbreeding. So drinking metal was really just a creative continuation of that theme. One of the last Habsburg kings, Charles II of Spain, suffered from a tragic collection of health problems: seizures, infertility, and what modern historians call the Habsburg jaw, a condition so pronounced it looked like he was perpetually chewing an invisible sandwich. Charles's doctors, desperate to fix him, prescribed a variety of alchemical tonics, including, naturally, aurum potable. He drank it dutifully, believing it would strengthen his body and mind. It did neither. When he died in 1700, aged only 38, an autopsy revealed his organs were shriveled, his body full of fluid, and his intestines rotted. Which, while not strictly diagnostic, suggests that drinking gold hadn't been the best choice. The fashionable alchemists. It's easy to laugh quietly. Of course, this is a sleep story, but remember, these were the most educated people of their time. Alchemy wasn't fringe science. It was mainstream, practiced by scholars, monks, and doctors across Europe. They genuinely believed gold was medicine. And to be fair, gold does have mild antimicrobial properties. In extremely small amounts, it's used in modern medicine today. The difference is that we don't melt it into wine and drink it by the goblet. But in the 1500s, moderation was not fashionable. If gold was divine, more must be better. So people consumed it in doses that would make a modern toxicologist cry softly into their clipboard. The philosophy behind the glitter. The obsession wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Alchemy was never only about metals. It was about purity, transforming the base into the perfect, the mortal into the divine. And what better metaphor for that transformation than a king? He was, after all, the most elevated of men, God's representative on earth, refined above the common masses. So, the symbolism was irresistible. By ingesting gold, The monarch symbolically purified his soul. He wasn't just healing his body, he was affirming his cosmic role, the bridge between heaven and earth. Of course, it's difficult to be a divine intermediary when you're also vomiting gold dust into a basin. But such was the contradiction of royal life. The alchemist's promise. Alchemists thrived on this royal vanity. They promised power, perfection, and longevity, the three things kings desired most. And every failed potion could be explained away by saying, the process was almost correct, but we need a little more funding. It was the Renaissance equivalent of a Kickstarter. Some genuinely believed in their craft, others were skilled con artists. A few, like Paracelsus, the famously eccentric Swiss physician, tried to combine alchemy with real chemistry. He also made his own version of drinkable gold, claiming it could illuminate the spirit and balance the humors. Which, translated into modern terms, means it did absolutely nothing but make people feel fancy. How to drink gold, 16th century style. If you'd like to imagine the experience, purely for historical curiosity, of course, here's how a typical gold tonic might be prepared. Take 1 part powdered gold leaf. Add strong wine or brandy. Stir until it resembles a glittery sludge. Optionally, add crushed pearls, coral, or powdered sapphires, because why not bankrupt yourself internally and externally at once? Then, drink slowly. Savor the metallic tang, the faint scent of vinegar from the acids used to dissolve it, and the overwhelming feeling that this was probably a mistake. The decline of the golden cure. By the 17th century, as real chemistry began to replace alchemy, aurum potable quietly faded out of fashion. Doctors realized that gold was, in fact, indigestible, and that patients who drank it often died with a suspiciously expensive glitter in their stomachs. By the Enlightenment, drinking gold became a punchline, something superstitious ancestors had done. Though, ironically, a few modern luxury brands have revived the idea in edible gold desserts and cocktails. Because some traditions never die, they just get a better PR team. The glittering ghost of vanity. What's striking about this whole story isn't the foolishness, it's the sincerity. These people weren't trying to show off. They truly believed they were consuming light, perfection, and divinity. And in a strange way, it made sense in their world. To them, gold was eternal, incorruptible, luminous, untouchable. It didn't rot like flesh or fade like paint. It was everything humans weren't. So, the desire to swallow a bit of that eternity feels almost understandable. Of course, it didn't work. But neither did most things in the 16th century. Doctors prescribed leeches for headaches, burned witches for weather problems, and bled patients for stomachaches. Compared to that, a little liquid gold was practically progressive. Let's drift away. So, picture it. A dimly lit chamber in a Renaissance palace. A golden goblet glinting by candlelight. A weary monarch raises it to his lips, eyes half closed, whispering a prayer to the alchemists, invisible gods. He drinks. It burns faintly, bitter and metallic. He believes he feels the warmth of heaven flowing through his veins. Though, in truth, it's just his liver filing a complaint. Outside, the world goes on. Peasants planting, merchants trading, wars quietly beginning somewhere else. And in that moment, the king feels eternal, for about half an hour. History, it turns out, has always been full of people willing to poison themselves beautifully. Hey everyone! Tonight, we're not visiting a palace or a battlefield. We're stepping into a monastery. Somewhere quiet, stone-walled, and smelling faintly of candle wax and cabbage soup. The monks here rise before dawn, chant prayers in echoing halls, and live lives of obedience, humility, and mild mischief. Because as holy as monasteries were supposed to be, they were also full of secrets. And the people keeping them, the monks themselves, were surprisingly good at it. So tonight, let's drift softly through the cloisters of medieval Europe, and peek behind the walls where silence was sacred. But rule breaking was practically an art form. Silence and subterfuge. To live as a monk was to surrender your will to the church. Every hour of your day was structured: when to pray, when to eat, when to sleep. You couldn't own property, or have money, or, in many orders, even speak without permission. Naturally, this meant that monks spent much of their time finding creative ways to bend the rules. Because even in the 12th century, complete obedience was a bit much. The monastic vow of silence, for instance, sounds peaceful. But imagine not being allowed to talk. Ever, even to say, "Could you please pass the bread?" So monks invented a complex system of hand gestures. It started innocently: a sign for bread, another for water, another for, "Brother Thomas has stolen the cheese again." But over time, these signs became a sort of private language. In some monasteries, monks used it to gossip, trade favors, or quietly coordinate forbidden activities. Like secret brewing, or smuggling letters, or planning exactly how to sneak a pig into the kitchen without the abbot noticing. They couldn't use their voices. So they learned to use their fingers. The hidden cellars. Monasteries were supposed to be models of simplicity, stone, wood, and prayer. But they were also some of the wealthiest landowners in Europe. They produced wine, beer, cheese, and manuscripts, all valuable commodities. And where there's profit, there's temptation. In many abbeys, the monks kept two sets of accounts. One official, shown to visiting bishops, modest, holy, appropriately poor-looking. And another, hidden away, detailing their very healthy wine trade. When church inspectors came to ensure poverty was being properly observed, the monks would quietly seal off their better storerooms. A false wall here, a hidden cellar door there. One chronicler in the 14th century described a monastery in Burgundy where a secret tunnel led from the kitchen to a private wine vault, for the use of the brethren during times of fasting. Because apparently, abstinence is easier with a little Burgundy. These hidden rooms were known jokingly as the Lord's Reserves. No one mentioned them aloud. But everyone knew where to find the key. The forbidden books. Now, monks were also the keepers of knowledge, copying ancient manuscripts by hand. They preserved classical works of philosophy, medicine, and science. But officially, they were only supposed to copy approved texts, scripture, commentaries, the occasional saint's life. Yet, curiosity is hard to silence, even under a vow of obedience. So many monasteries had secret libraries. Collections of books that weren't exactly heretical, but weren't exactly approved, either. Aristotle, Ovid, a few suspiciously detailed anatomy manuals. Sometimes even forbidden mystical texts, alchemical treatises, Jewish or Arabic medical writings, or old pagan poetry. These were kept locked away, often behind the scriptorium walls or under floorboards. A trusted few could access them, usually at night, by candlelight. It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. Most monks weren't trying to overthrow the church, they just wanted to understand the world. And sometimes, that meant reading things Rome didn't particularly like. You can almost imagine it. A sleepy, Bearded monk tiptoeing through a dark corridor, holding a hidden scroll under his robe, whispering to himself. Just one more chapter of Aristotle, and then I'll repent. The secret letters. Now and then, monasteries also became centers of espionage, quietly, politely, and with excellent penmanship. Because monks could write, and very few others could. They had access to wax seals, codes, and messenger networks that stretched across Europe. So when nobles wanted to send messages they didn't want intercepted, they often used monasteries as post offices. Some abbots even acted as go-betweens in royal intrigues, sending letters disguised as theological commentary or wrapped in layers of harmless scripture. And within the monasteries themselves, monks sometimes sent secret notes, love letters, confessions, or simple gossip, written in miniature Latin, slipped under doors or hidden in psalters. In the Cistercian Abbey of Clairvaux, inspectors once found a collection of personal letters between two monks, expressing affection, doubt, and longing. It was scandalous, of course, but also deeply human. In a world that demanded total suppression of self, the smallest expression of feeling became an act of quiet rebellion. Brewing beneath the cloister. Ah, yes. The beer. Monks were famous for brewing beer, and for good reason. It was clean, nourishing, and a legitimate alternative to unsafe water. But official monastic rules allowed only a limited daily ration. Naturally, that didn't stop them. In Germany and Flanders, monks perfected the art of brewing extra beer for visitors. Which was a convenient category, because technically, every monk was a visitor somewhere. Some monasteries had secret side breweries, unlisted, uninspected, and run by a few trusted brothers. These produced stronger, richer ales than the ones served at meals. The proceeds funded personal comforts, better robes, imported spices, sometimes even small bribes to keep inquisitive abbots quiet. There's a lovely irony here. Today, those same monasteries, brewing traditions survive as Trappist beer, admired worldwide for purity and devotion. And yet, the origins were quietly tipsy. The midnight kitchens. Food was another matter entirely. Monastic life was built on fasting, long stretches of the calendar where meat was forbidden. Fish was allowed, though the definition of fish became suspiciously flexible. Beaver tails, for instance, were classified as fish. So were certain types of birds that lived near water. It was theological problem solving at its finest. But some monks went further. They built night kitchens, hidden chambers near the dormitories where, after Compline, the final prayer of the evening, they would roast, stew, and feast in secret. Sometimes it was simple hunger, sometimes it was camaraderie. A stolen sausage shared among friends in candlelight. A small rebellion that made the next day's prayers feel bearable. When discovered, punishments ranged from penance to silence to being sent to a more miserable monastery. But still, every generation found new ways to sneak the bacon. The monks who fell in love. And then, there were the human secrets. Because vows of chastity were easy to write down, less easy to live by. There are countless quiet records of monks who formed attachments, sometimes with nuns in nearby convents, sometimes with townsfolk, sometimes with each other. Letters survive, full of longing, apology, theology, and heartbreak. One even ends with the line, "I cannot forget you, though I pray I may." In some places, monasteries quietly tolerated these relationships as long as they didn't cause scandal. A discreet affair was less damaging than an open rebellion. Everyone knew. No one said anything. Silence was both the rule and the protection. The secret scientists. Monks also experimented, sometimes literally. Monasteries had workshops for metalwork, glassmaking, and medicine. In those quiet rooms, curiosity occasionally strayed beyond theology. Some monks studied the stars, though astrology was officially forbidden. Others experimented with herbs and chemicals. A few even dabbled in early alchemy, searching for cures, dyes, or elixirs that might reveal the divine order of matter. Brother Roger Bacon, a 13th century Franciscan, studied optics and natural philosophy so intensely that his superiors accused him of sorcery. He wasn't trying to summon demons, just to understand light. But in medieval Europe, understanding too much could get you in trouble. So, he wrote in code, disguised his experiments as prayers, and continued in secret. Because sometimes, truth had to hide behind faith's walls. The quiet corruption. Not all secrets were noble, of course. Some were depressingly human. Greed, abuse, or hypocrisy. Certain abbots siphoned off monastery wealth for personal use. Some kept mistresses in town. Others sold relics that were questionably authentic. One French abbey claimed to possess not one, but 3 true nails from the crucifixion, which, if genuine, would have made the cross a small iron fortress. But again, this was medieval Europe. Everyone cheated a little, even the pious. Especially the pious. The sound of hidden laughter. For all their solemnity, monasteries were not humorless places. In fact, monks loved practical jokes. The chronicles are full of them, quiet, harmless mischiefs performed under the cover of obedience. There's a story from a Benedictine house in England where a novice was told to go to the kitchens and ask for a left-handed candle. He spent hours looking for it. Another monk claimed to have seen a ghost in the refectory, only to reveal it was Brother Matthew under a sheet, holding a turnip lantern. Even their illuminated manuscripts sometimes contained jokes. Margins filled with snails fighting knights, rabbits blowing trumpets, monkeys dressed as priests. Perhaps it was the only safe way to express frustration, tiny rebellions drawn in gold ink. So, while their mouths stayed silent, their pens told the truth. Secrets as survival. In the end, these secrets weren't just sins, they were survival. The monastic life demanded an impossible standard: total devotion, total purity, total obedience. No one can live like that indefinitely. So they adapted. A hidden book. A sip of forbidden ale. A quiet friendship that felt like sunlight in the grayness of prayer. It wasn't defiance against God. It was defiance against despair. And in that quiet defiance, monasteries remained human. Flawed, funny, full of life, even under vows meant to extinguish it. Let's drift away. So picture it now. The cloister at night. The faint glow of a single candle behind a shuttered window. A quill scratching softly on parchment. Somewhere, a hidden cellar door creaks open, and the warm smell of bread drifts through stone corridors. Outside, the stars turn silently. Inside, a monk closes his secret book, hides it under the floorboards, and folds his hands in prayer. Because dawn will come soon, and with it, the illusion of perfect obedience. But for this one quiet moment, between darkness and duty, he allows himself to be simply human. Hey everyone. Tonight, we're heading somewhere a little quieter than usual. A place where time barely moves, and where even whispers sound too loud. We're descending into the tombs of ancient Egypt. Those long corridors carved into the rock, filled with gold, linen, prayers, and opportunity. Because where there are treasures, there are always people willing to risk everything to take them. And for 3,000 years, Egyptian tombs were not so much resting places as they were irresistible invitations. The pharaohs built eternity in stone. But eternity, it turns out, has terrible security. So tonight, let's drift softly into the world of tomb robbers. The men who broke into sacred chambers, the ones who tried to stop them. And the surprisingly bureaucratic afterlife of ancient Egyptian crime. The myth of the curse. We'll start by clearing one thing up. Most tomb robbers were not struck down by mystical curses. They were struck down by something much more predictable. The Egyptian justice system. Because contrary to popular imagination, Egypt wasn't full of people who feared ancient maledictions. They feared the police. And the police, it turns out, were very real, and occasionally quite enthusiastic. Still, the myth of the mummy's curse endures, partly because it's a beautiful story. You steal from the dead, and the gods take revenge. Lightning, plagues, sudden sniffles. But the truth is more human, and somehow sadder. Most robbers didn't die dramatically. They were caught, interrogated, and often executed, usually after a confession that had been encouraged with sticks. The temptation of eternity. To understand tomb robbers, you have to understand just how tempting those tombs were. Pharaohs were buried like gods. Their tombs were stocked with gold, silver, jewels, weapons, furniture, clothing, food, even boats, all meant to be used in the afterlife. And they didn't exactly hide them. Massive tombs with monumental entrances, brightly painted with scenes of abundance. And guards who were paid, not very much. So, within a generation or two of any royal burial, whispers would start. Someone knew where the tomb was. Someone knew which guards were old. Someone knew which priest was open to a quiet bribe. And one moonless night, a few men with torches would slip into the desert and disappear into a shaft. The professional robbers. Tomb robbery wasn't a random act of desperation. It was an organized business, complete with teams, tools, and lookouts. Some robbers were stonecutters who'd helped build the tombs in the first place. They knew the layouts, the traps, and the shortcuts. Others were locals who'd grown up near the necropolises, poor men watching the rich berry mountains of gold a few hundred yards from their huts. There were even professional gangs, passing down techniques through families. They'd dig new tunnels, pry open sealed doors, and chip away gold leaf from coffins with copper chisels. Sometimes, they melted the gold on site, easier to carry that way. A night of work could yield enough treasure to buy several lifetimes of comfort. If you weren't caught, of course. The men who wrote their crimes down. The strangest thing about Egyptian tomb robbery isn't that it happened, it's that we know about it. Because some of the robbers, or rather the officials who caught them, left written records. Papyrus scrolls survive from around 1100 BCE, particularly from the reign of Ramesses IX, describing investigations into tomb robberies. They read like ancient detective reports. One of the most famous is the Abbot Papyrus. It lists tombs inspected by police, notes which ones had been violated, and includes testimonies from captured robbers. And the Leopold Amherst Papyrus goes further, giving us direct confessions. In one, a robber calmly explains how his team entered a royal tomb, broke through the stone, looted the coffins, and divided the gold between them, all while the guards were conveniently asleep. He even tells the exact weight of the plunder. The gold we found amounted to 2 pounds and 2/3. Precise, professional, and very, very doomed. The investigation. When word of a robbery spread, The local mayor or high priest would summon the Medjai, the desert police. They'd march to the site, interview the guards, and begin the tedious process of blaming everyone. Guards would swear oaths of innocence, sometimes while standing in front of the god's statue. Because nothing says truth like lying to a divine falcon carved from basalt. If a suspect was named, interrogation followed. And in ancient Egypt, interrogation was not a polite conversation over tea. Records politely describe it as the stick was applied. It meant beating, usually on the soles of the feet. Painful, but survivable, unless repeated indefinitely. And after a few sessions of that, most suspects confessed to crimes they'd committed, witnessed, or simply imagined. Their statements were written down, signed by witnesses, and sealed. Then they were punished. Often by death, sometimes by impalement, sometimes by being burned alive. Because nothing discouraged future theft like a criminal on a stake beside the road. The inside jobs. Many tomb robberies were not committed by desperate villagers at all, but by the very people paid to protect the tombs. Priests, guards, and even high officials often worked together. They'd discover a robbery and then quietly redistribute the spoils among themselves. Sometimes they even reused tombs, removing older mummies and valuables to make space for new burials. There's a preserved record from the Deir el Medina community, the workers who built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Toward the end of the New Kingdom, when the government stopped paying them regularly, the workers went on strike, and, eventually, began raiding the very tombs they'd once carved. It was less rebellion than survival. When the pharaoh's treasury ran dry, eternity became negotiable. The curse of bureaucracy. Ironically, the real punishment for tomb robbery often came from paperwork. Egyptians loved documents, receipts, lists, inventories, signatures. Even tomb inspectors had to fill out forms in triplicate. After each robbery, teams were sent to reseal tombs and record what was missing. They'd note how the coffins were broken, whether the mummies were intact. And sometimes, bizarrely, whether the amulets were still in their proper places. Imagine being an ancient accountant, cataloging the afterlife's damage report. The deceased's left arm detached. The sacred necklace missing. The dignity of the eternal order severely compromised. All written neatly in hieratic script, tied with a cord, filed in a temple archive. And promptly ignored when the next robbery happened. The loot's afterlife. Gold taken from tombs didn't just vanish. It re-entered circulation, melted down, reworked, and quietly absorbed by the same society that condemned the theft. Some of it likely ended up back in royal treasuries. Since temples often purchased or confiscated suspicious gold from the markets. Egypt, ever practical, recycled eternity. So, while priests cursed the robbers for desecration, they may well have worn bracelets once intended for the afterlife of someone else. It's an almost poetic hypocrisy. Death's wealth funding life's rituals. The reburials. Eventually, tomb robbery became so rampant that the priests of the 21st dynasty decided to take drastic action. They opened up the royal tombs themselves. Not to loot, but to protect. They gathered mummies of past pharaohs, stripped them of most valuables for safekeeping, and reburied them together in large hidden caches. The most famous of these is the Deir el-Bahari cache, discovered in 1881. Inside were over 40 royal mummies, including Seti I, Ramesses II, and several queens, all bundled together like an exhausted family reunion. Each mummy had been unwrapped and rewrapped multiple times over centuries. Their gold removed, their names carefully recorded, their bodies patched like antique dolls. It was practical, respectful in its own strange way. And it kept them safe for another 3,000 years. Until, of course, archaeologists arrived and unwrapped them again. The modern robbers. Even after Egypt's ancient civilization ended, tomb robbing never really stopped. In the Greek and Roman periods, in the Ottoman era, and even during early archaeology, the lure of buried gold was irresistible. Many of the discoveries made by 19th century explorers were preceded by generations of quiet local excavation. Families in Upper Egypt knew where tomb shafts lay, and occasionally dug at night to retrieve small artifacts for sale. It wasn't always greed, sometimes it was survival. A scarab sold to a foreign collector could feed a family for months. And when the great museums began paying, the trade only expanded. So, in a way, the tomb robber is one of history's longest running professions. From 1100 BCE to 1900 CE, a 4,000-year tradition of ignoring, do not enter, signs. The irony of the curse. In the early 20th century, when Howard Carter discovered Tutankhamun's tomb, the old myth of the mummy's curse returned in full force. Several people connected to the expedition died prematurely, and newspapers couldn't resist. But Carter himself lived comfortably for another 17 years, proving that if there was a curse, it was highly selective. In truth, the curse wasn't supernatural, it was ecological. Ancient tombs were sealed for centuries, full of mold, bacteria, and toxic gases. Breathing them in could cause serious illness. So, in a roundabout way, perhaps the pharaohs did protect themselves. With microbiology, even in death, they had the last word. The human truth beneath the sand. It's easy to see tomb robbers as villains, desecrators of the dead. And, yes, they were. But they were also reflections of the world around them. They lived in poverty beside mountains of buried wealth. They were promised eternity, but couldn't afford dinner. And when they looked across the desert at a golden tomb shining under the moon, perhaps they thought, if the gods wanted this to stay buried, they shouldn't have made it so easy to find. Their punishments were harsh, their lives short. But their actions, recorded in the same careful hieroglyphs as kings, remind us that history isn't just built by the great. It's shaped by those who broke the rules and left fingerprints in the dust. Let's drift away. So now, imagine it. A moonlit desert, cool and silent. Far below, a narrow shaft winds into the earth. The air smells of limestone and ancient resin. A torch flickers, casting red light on painted walls. A few men crouch by a coffin, chiseling away at eternity. One whispers, "Hurry." Another listens for footsteps. A gold amulet glints in the torchlight, a small sun in the dark. They take it, wrap it in linen, and vanish back into the sand. By dawn, the tomb is sealed again. And silence returns. The pharaoh continues his journey through the afterlife. A little lighter than before. And the robbers, the forgotten, the condemned, walk back to their village, carrying history in their hands. And secrets that even time couldn't bury.